Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, bonjour.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome on behalf of UNESCO for this ministerial meeting, 1 year into COVID, prioritizing education recovery to avoid a generational catastrophe. In order to start this session, please welcome Mrs. Audrey Azoulay, Director General, UNESCO.
Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to this online conference and thank you for joining us today. 1 year ago, the world entered lockdown and a global educational catastrophe took shape. In a few short weeks, nearly 1.6 billion pupils and students, 91% of the world's school-age population, were affected by school closure. 1 year on, we still stand on very fragile ground. Today, more than 2/3 of the student population, 1 billion students, face ongoing learning disruptions. The pandemic could cause millions of people to go hungry, many of them women, 47 million of whom could be plunged into extreme poverty. Economic crises are putting strain on educational budgets where the needs are the most pressing. The pandemic is continuing to test global solidarity, and every day counts. With every day that passes, learning losses grow. More than 100 million additional children could find themselves without basic reading skills after schools closed completely for an average of 16 weeks worldwide. This could wipe out progress made since 2015, when the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development was launched. In parallel, 11 million girls may never go back to school, joining over 130 million girls already out of school. If this trend continues, primary education for all girls will not be achieved before 2050. The situation is all the more concerning, given that the most vulnerable pupils are the hardest hit, especially those without access to distance learning tools, 1/3 of all pupils around the world. This educational crisis threatens the very future of our societies. And if nothing is done, it will exacerbate inequalities and create more exclusion, more poverty, more marginalization. Given the commun, un droit fondamental.
Those few principles, what are they? Well, first principle, school is irreplaceable. The pandemic showed it. School is the place where you learn, but school is also the place where you are protected, nourished and socialized, where you find yourself in safety. Second principle, more than ever, we need resilient school systems, innovative school systems, able to face shocks, be it present shocks, future shocks, local ones or global ones. Third principle, no screen will ever be able to replace a learner and a teacher, because teachers know that being pedagogical is about interaction, emotion, and humanity. Following those principles, we will keep on acting in order to make sure that there is a recovery for education. A recovery for education is first and foremost reopen schools in all safety everywhere and wherever this is possible. This is the goal of the practical guides we developed together with our partners, whom I would like to thank. This is also the goal of our great campaign, Girls Back to School, which was disseminated to over 400,000 people. And in order to guarantee those reopenings of schools everywhere and as soon as possible, UNESCO called in December 2020 in order to make sure that the 100 million educators and teachers in the world should be considered as a priority population when it comes to vaccination campaign. Recovery for education is also keep on deploying remote learning solutions using the internet, but also with the development of new solutions without connectivity, such as TV or radio, because we know that half of the global population does not have internet access. This is what the Coalition for Education on a Daily Basis is doing, with a particular focus and priority for girls' education. 3 million girls in Uganda, 2 million in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and 1 million in Mali, who were supported by UNESCO when it comes to remote learning. This education recovery that we are preparing for, that we are calling for, is not coming back to the status quo. This pandemic led us to rethink education, to refound it, first and foremost by funding it better, and this should be a priority when recovery plans too often leave on the side those education stakes, with only 2% of the amounts of the recovery plans dedicated to education, and yet we know that there will be no sustainable future without education. But we should also rethink the means and the contents of education in order for education to be actual and to embrace the stakes of the 21st century. We have a Commission for the Future of Education, which is working exactly on those goals. Its final report on the future for education by 2050, fed by a global conversation with over 1 million consultations, will be presented at the General Conference of UNESCO here in November. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 1 year ago, we were able to unite in order to face our collective responsibility by implementing together in record time unexpected solutions, new solutions for education. Right now, we should keep on extending our responsibility, and now that it is time for recovery, education should be a priority in order to avoid a catastrophe that would threaten the future of our society, that would have repercussions on the international community and disastrous consequences over several generations. This is our responsibility. Thank you.
To listen to the vision of Mr. Gutierrez, Secretary General of the United Nations, 1 year into COVID.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank UNESCO for convening this ministerial event 1 year into the COVID-19 crisis. The crisis has shown a spotlight on the irreplaceable value of schools and teachers in our societies. I've been encouraged that across the pandemic, governments have strived to keep schools open, either fully or partially. Almost all countries have put in place distance learning alternatives, even if they were far from sufficient to reach all students. And we have seen innovative partnerships take shape, including UNESCO's Global Education Coalition. Despite these efforts, the crisis has already taken a heavy toll on learners, teachers, and parents, and consequences will resound down the generations. Almost 1 billion students are still being affected by school closures and restrictions. Some 463 million children have been unable to access digital and broadcast remote learning. Over 100 million children are expected to fall below the minimum proficiency level in reading due to school closures, reversing 2 decades of progress. And more than 20 million girls are at risk of dropping out of education altogether. All the while, funding for education has been reduced, while education accounts for a very slim share of stimulus packages. At this pivotal moment, I'm calling on all countries to protect education in national budgets, enhance the focus on education in stimulus packages, maintain or increase aid to education, fully replenish the Global Partnership for Education Fund, and use the recovery to narrow education divides, expand digital connectivity, and reimagine education. If we were to avert a generational catastrophe, reduce inequalities, and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, then we simply must prioritize and protect education. Thank you.
I now would like to give the floor to Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who's Director General of the World Health Organization. Over the past year, WHO and UNESCO have been providing guidance to countries on school-related public health measures in the face of global pandemic. Let's now hear the word of Dr. Ghebreyesus.
Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, the COVID-19 pandemic has put the vital link between health and education in the spotlight. School closures have badly disrupted education for millions of students around the world, especially for those without online access or who were already facing other risks to their health and well-being. The pandemic has also affected the mental health of students and disrupted access to school health services and nutritional programs. WHO, UNESCO, and UNICEF are working together to advocate for investments such as this, which pay a return for both health and education. Without universal access to education and health services, the inequalities which have expanded even further during the pandemic will continue to grow. WHO recognizes the central role that schools can play in safeguarding student health and well-being, and will issue its first set of evidence-based guidelines on school health services in the coming months. Schools provide an opportunity for timely interventions across a range of conditions, including anxiety and depression, behavioral disorders, diabetes, obesity, and undernutrition. As we continue to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, it is critical that we work across the UN system with governments and civil society to do everything we can to keep schools open. School closures should only be a last resort, and if schools must close, they should be reopened as soon as possible. No matter what crisis we face, education must continue. The future of our children depends upon it. I thank you.
It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Sarah Anyang Agbor, who is Commissioner for Education, Science, Technology and Innovation of the African Union.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, good day. It is my pleasure and honor to bring you warm greetings from the re-elected chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Dr. Musa Faki Mahamat. On behalf of the African Union Commission, I humbly express appreciation to you all for your participation in this virtual event on the theme, 1 year into COVID, prioritizing education recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, we as stakeholders active in the education development ecosystem can testify to COVID-19 impact on teaching and learning, particularly in Africa. As such, policy-level responses targeted at strengthening education recovery are part of the priorities of the African Union Commission. Therefore, the Specialized Technical Committee on Education, Science and Technology held a virtual extraordinary ministerial session on 30th April 2020 to address pressing challenges created by the COVID-19 pandemic. In implementing the decisions of the ministers, the African Union Commission embarked on the Continued Learning Initiative, which focuses on 4 key elements, namely, 1. Communication campaign to create awareness on opportunities for online learning. Joint social media campaigns have been held with partners on digital skills, courses and open educational resources. A webinar on opportunities for online learning was held on 7th May 2020 as part of a series being organized on COVID-19. 2. Implement joint initiatives with partners. Member states are being offered a free of charge learning management system and the technical support in order to provide virtual learning while schools are closed. Botswana, Equatorial Guinea, Mauritius, South Africa, South Sudan, and Uganda have expressed interest in the offer, and discussions are ongoing regarding implementation. 3. policy guidance, and dialogue with member states. On 30th March 2020, a joint AUC UNICEF statement to member states was issued targeting the education sector response. The Commission also developed a guidance on reopening of schools. Fourthly, facilitate learning through monitoring, documenting, and disseminating best practices and lessons. A knowledge and learning platform was developed to facilitate sharing of experiences of member states' development partner initiatives and innovations during COVID-19. Furthermore, the African Union DOTSS framework offers an integrated approach to transforming Africa's education systems, allowing member states to reach every child to learn, whether in a crisis situation such as COVID-19 or in reaching the most marginalized children with quality and relevant education. DOTS involves D for digital connectivity of schools, O for online learning, T, teachers as facilitators and motivators of learning, S, safety online and offline, and S, skills-focused learning. Digitalization and innovations are transforming socio-economic systems by creating jobs and reducing poverty and inequality, facilitating the delivery of goods and services, promoting education and skills development, and contributing to the achievement of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, and the Sustainable Development Goals. The Department of Education, Science, Technology and Innovation is developing its digital education implementation strategy. The consequences of COVID-19 have reinforced the importance of transforming Africa's education systems through digital transformation and accelerating the implementation of the AU STC decision on DOTSS. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, sincere gratitude to UNESCO and her partners for leading this process. AUC is committed to the process of prioritizing education recovery. I wish you fruitful and meaningful deliberations. Thank you for your kind attention.
After those compelling messages, it's now time to hear the voice of those who are directly concerned, learners and teachers from UNESCO Associated School Network, our global network that gathers more than 11,500 schools in over 180 countries all around the world.
March 2020, we really thought lockdown would only last for 2 weeks, but now here we are, 1 year later, and the pandemic is still not over. Now, a lot of things have changed in my life this year. First of all, I graduated from high school. I was so excited to start this new chapter of my life. I'm a college student now. I felt like I was unstoppable, but we are still learning online, and the worst part is, I don't know how my teachers look like. I don't know how it feels like to walk into the hallway of your college with pride because you're an adult now. I have never thought that this is how my college experience will be, but things don't always go as planned.
I'm coping pretty well. We resumed school a while ago and it has been stressful, but we're just trying to retrieve back what we lost during the quarantine and catch up with our current syllabus. As of right now, I would say that the worst thing about not being in school is the amount of work that you miss. Because as we all know, learning behind the screen and learning in person is incomparable.
The virus has influenced all of us. All of the Russian students were moved to an online study. Needless to say, it was a rough year for all of us. A lot of my friends were struggling with a little depressive mood. They were missing their friends and teachers. So did I.
Soy maestra de educación preescolar en el Jardín de Niños Ignacio Manuel Altamirano, el cual se encuentra en la ciudad de Monterrey, del estado de Nuevo León, México. El contacto ha sido positivo y negativo. Negativo por el hecho de no poder vivenciar cada momento de los alumnos, pero positivo porque nos dimos la oportunidad de explorar nuevos métodos de enseñanza que han enriquecido al alumno y sobre todo a las personas ajenas a nuestra profesión le han encontrado valor y dificultad con lo que se ejerce.
It has been a year since the online learning began in Indonesia. When the pandemic started, I was a year 11 student. Now I'm preparing to get into university. The past 1 year have been really hard and tiring for me. I'm sure most students would feel the same. At the beginning, it was really hard. Most of us were unprepared and didn't expect any of the situation. Not being at school for almost a year made me Someone lose the chemistry between school and student. It's very hard to explain. This semester will be my last semester in that school, so in fact, I'm really sad. It seems like I don't have enough memories and stories with the teacher and my friends. However, we need to keep fighting. There are a lot of lessons learned we've got from this situation, so we need to stay motivated.
We've been all fighting against the COVID-19 pandemic for a year, and schools have closed all around the world and have now opened partially in Hong Kong. And we've been learning online for the past year, and teachers have gave me good guidance so I can learn and work online. And I do miss my teachers and friends a lot.
Our next speaker is UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Education, Mrs. Stefania Giannini, who will present to us the current status of the impact of the pandemic on education and the lessons learned during the crisis this year.
Thank you, Amel. What moving testimonies from our associate schools network, ESPINET UNESCO. I'm sure they echo all children of the world, and this is not only an educational disruption, this is really an emotional disruption. And we know, we're just 1 year ago with a big question on the screen around the tough decision to school to be closed. Now, as the pandemic continues, it's about how to keep schools open. So let's take a quick look at the figures here behind me. As you know, UNESCO rang the alarm when it came out with the first global figures and warning about the risk of increasing inequalities. Today, more than 800 million students are still affected by this disruption. But the positive trend, the most positive trend I want to underline, is that governments are taking every measure to keep schools open safely. Schools now are fully open in 107 countries and partially in another 70. And this is the right direction to go, for sure. Well, you see it here on this slide. It's about the trend over time. The pink and lighter blue are dominant, and they represent partially and full openings, respectively. But this stands in contrast of the first months of the pandemic, when schools closure were the norm, represented here in purple. Today, schools are closed in 30 countries. That means that some lessons have been learned, definitely, and guidance have been taken on board to support the school reopenings. And this is a very good news. But if you factor in partial closure, schools are being closed on an average for 6.5 months. That means 2/3 of an academic schooling year. My generation probably could have not imagined such a situation. This has put everyone to the test, but on the other side, it opened also the door to a great potential of changing the system, innovation, adapting the system and make it more flexible and resilient as it should be in the coming years. Well, let's look at this data from the Joint Survey, UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Bank, about the solutions deployed, what countries, what education system put in practice over the last 12, 13 months. The majority of governments, definitely 133, set up a mix of solutions, traditional channels, TV, radio, and online digital platforms. And this is strong ground to build on. This is strong ground to build on to make education more resilient and to bridge the digital divide, which is still a huge obstacle for learning, especially in the global south. But what about the impact of this crisis? What is really the consequence that we'll see in the coming months and maybe in the next years? It's a kind of shadow pandemic on education. We must say exactly as it is. Well, we're just starting to get a global picture of learning losses and damages in learning. UNESCO research suggests that every month of counted schooling lost is equivalent to about 2 months of lost learning. 1 means 2, and this is very worrying data. The study by UNESCO Institute of Statistics, which is the global international provider of data in education, estimates today that over 100 million children and youth will fall below the minimum proficiency level in reading because of the COVID-19. And there were already in this category around 500 million. So 100 million plus 500. So that means gains made over the decades are erased, definitely. And our study warns that without exceptional efforts, exceptional commitment, exceptional investment, it'll take a decade to make up for learning losses we are seeing now. Well, there is one major condition to keep schools open safely and support learners to catch up. And this is teachers. This is teachers which are in the center, at the core of the process. Protecting them must be a top priority. We advocated from UNESCO for them to be prioritized in vaccination campaigns. And according to a global survey just conducted by UNESCO, we can say that 76 countries out of 115 have officially prioritized teachers, out of which 13 count them in the first phase of vaccination campaign. And this is a good news as well. This is about taking a responsibility to making education part of the huge efforts to start to address this big challenge of the sanitary crisis. But investing now to support teachers and learning will dramatically reduce costs further down the road by up to 75%. But what about investment? This is maybe the last and the most delicate part of the story. Are we on the right track? Well, according to our joint Education Watch study with the World Bank, 65% of poorer countries have already reduced their education budgets at national level, against the 33 of the rich ones. And education is just invisible, almost invisible, in the stimulus package of the 54 countries we analyzed in our survey. Out of $14 trillion mobilized to fight the COVID-19 last year, 2020, UNESCO estimates that a mere 2% has been allocated to education. Well, our mission today is to avoid a generational catastrophe, just to quote what the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, said clearly to political leaders in the world last year. And this can be done. This is in our hands. It's a matter of political vision. It's a matter of political commitment. It's a matter of making the right choices, especially about financing and investing. in education. I think that we see now something in action in a different way from the past, a new kind of global solidarity which definitely is about putting together the system with a new model of cooperation. And this is what UNESCO did from the beginning of the crisis, launching the Global Education Coalition. I wish to thank today the 175 members who have joined the coalition 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago. They aligned their expertise to support education systems at country level in almost 100 countries. And this is about training of teachers. This is about providing infrastructures in digital learning where they don't have. And this is about supporting countries to give solutions and also to share their knowledge. At least 400 million learners and 12 million teachers, directly or indirectly, of course, from these actions can benefit today. And it's a great achievement. And it's about demonstrating commitment to education and the role of a new kind of multilateralism and global solidarity. From flagships and projects, this coalition is moving now to a kind of veritable mission-oriented approach. That means having precise targets, time-bound outcomes in order to say, in a few months, in 1 year, well, these are children, youth, teachers who benefited from our action. Let me mention some of these missions. First, it's about keeping 1 million youth with employability skills. Second, providing 1 million teachers with remote learning skills. Third, helping 1 million learners benefiting from remedial learning in STEM subjects. 5, bring 5 million girls back to school in 20 countries. Well, to conclude, education cannot be the victim of the crisis. It can be a big part of the solution. And with this, I invite you to join your sessions today and looking forward to meeting up in just over an hour in this beautiful room. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Giannini. I now invite you to connect to the sessions you have signed up for. For those who are in Roundtable 1 on reopening schools and protecting teachers, you can remain connected on this channel. If you've signed to session 2 and 3, please use the link that is available on the chat function next to you. The roundtables will start in a minute as soon as you are reconnected. Thank you.
Excellencies, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. My name is Vibeke Jensen, and I'm Director of the Division for Education for Sustainable Development and Peace here at UNESCO headquarters. And on behalf of UNESCO, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this roundtable on keeping schools open, prioritizing and supporting teachers. We're looking forward to a very exciting afternoon. We are also delighted that so many honorable ministers wanting to take the floor in this session. So without further delay, I'm very pleased to welcome Anshu Banerjee, who is the Director of the Division for Maternal, Newborn, Child and Adolescent Health and Aging at WHO, who has very kindly agreed to moderate this session. Many thanks, Anshu, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vibeke Jensen. And I would like to also welcome everyone to this roundtable on keeping schools open, prioritizing and supporting teachers. And it's a pleasure to be a part of this partnership together with UNESCO on behalf of WHO. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows there are language options. The session is in French and English. And for those who would like to follow the session in English, when there is translation, there's the button at the bottom to choose English, and there's also the button to choose French. Pour ceux qui voudraient suivre cette session en français.
So for those who would like to follow this session in French, you have a button on the bottom of your screen. You can choose your preferred language, English or French.
Following up on the excellent session we just had as the opening session, at the peak of the COVID pandemic, 1.5 billion children and adolescents were out of school, representing an unparalleled public crisis. And the closure of schools is undoubtedly harming also the health and well-being of young people, not only their educational attainments. School closures have resulted in an increase in anxiety, depression, and mental health distress, particularly for adolescents who are undergoing life transitions. For example, cancellations of final exams, graduation ceremonies, and internships for secondary school students are leading to an increased anxiety amongst this group. At the same time, also, a number of children have not been able to have had access to school health services. And sometimes because there's no alternative to this, or also because sometimes the sessions were just cancelled, and this has also increased their mental health anxieties. We also see that there has been disruption in physical activity. For many children, school closures and lockdowns have increased levels of physical inactivity, led to increased time spent on smartphones or in front of the television, and also disrupted regular sleep patterns. Further, millions of children depend on free or subsidized school meals to receive adequate nutrition, and many are at risk of going hungry without school meals. We also know that there has been an increase in violence against children, and that schools form an important part of child protective services. Finally, the dangers of the digital environment, with many schools moving instruction at least partially online, children are spending more time and often unsupervised on the internet, which opens them to cyberbullying from other children, as well as potential for predatory behavior from adults. So during this session, we are going to look at how to keep schools open as a priority and ensure a safe learning environment, and also how ensuring that teachers are safe, considered as frontline workers, and supported to adapt to a new learning environment. I just want to highlight that in partnership as UNICEF, UNESCO, and WHO in June 2020, we established a technical advisory group of experts on educational institutions and COVID-19 to make sure that important findings from research related to the pandemic and educational institutions are brought to the attention of policymakers. It informed critical guidance on school operations during the COVID-19 pandemic in order to keep schools open as long as possible and close schools as a last resort. Coming to the session, due to the high demand by ministers wishing to share a short statement, this roundtable is expected to run approximately maybe now 15 minutes beyond the actual closing time at 4 o'clock. We already started 10 minutes later and will maybe go a bit beyond. The closing plenary will automatically start immediately after this roundtable, and we will be presented in full, so no one will miss any part of the closing session. Also, the keynote speaker presentation, which will follow soon, will be added to the conference website. The event will be recorded and available for replay on UNESCO's YouTube page. And the recordings will also be added to the conference webpage. So with these introductory remarks, I would now like to hand over to Professor Didier Jourdan, who is going to give us an opening presentation on what does the evidence tell us about keeping schools open safely, the state-of-the-art review of the evidence. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ministers, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be invited to share with you the latest evidence that can contribute to defining educational policies during the pandemic. For this 1 year on scientific update, I have selected 3 solid facts to present for your consideration. Of course, all the studies I'll quote today have limitations that have to be taken into account because there were risks of confounding factors from other intervention implemented around the same time, because also there are limited numbers of implementation studies in schools, and because there are few studies from low and middle income countries. And this presentation does not consider the epidemiology of the new variants, because robust evidence on the potential impact in schools still not yet available. So the first solid fact is that school, next slide please, should be among the last places to close and the first to reopen. There are 2 reasons why. Next slide, please. First of all, and this is also what the Assistant Director General, Stefania Giannini, just said, more and more studies confirm what we already strongly suspected, that school closure are detrimental to child health and well-being and educational incomes, including, for example, learning loss in core subject, increase in the socio-economic skills gap. For example, a model based on the PISA data showed that closure could increase the learning gap by more than 30%, and also unprecedented declines in college enrollments, which was especially steep for graduates of low-income high schools. A recent systematic review including 46 studies, confirmed that school closure not only disrupt the education of students, but also affect their physical, mental, social development and well-being. Moreover, school closure restricts access to school meals, access to health services, social care, and school-based vaccinations, and of which disproportionately impact children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So in case of closure, we must provide additional support to schools in deprived areas and for students living in vulnerable situations. The second reason why it's very important to keep the schools open and to consider them among the last place to close and first to reopen is the fact that evidence confirms that closing school is not the most powerful measure to control the transmission, as you can see on the slide. A study of 32 countries shows that the largest effect among interventions was observed for stay-at-home orders and teleworking, closure of non-essential businesses and services, bans of gathering. As one might expect, given the older age of learners in universities and higher education establishments, closing them had a larger effect than the closure of school at secondary, primary, and preschool levels. Some studies also showed that transmission started to drop following other interventions and before school closures were implemented, and found no change in the gradient of decline after school closure. So school closure can contribute to reduction in transmission, but by themselves, they are insufficient to prevent the community transmission in the absence of early intervention. And now we have a lot of studies. This is extremely strong. Second solid fact now, school reopening with comprehensive infection prevention and control measures in place, and when the community infection levels are low or moderate, did not increase community transmission. First of all, next slide, yes. Incidence of the COVID-19 in school setting is directly linked to the level of community transmission. And it is also age dependent, with younger children less likely to be infected than adolescents. There's significant secondary transmission in schools. It happens, for example, in Israel, where high schools were closed less than 2 weeks after reopening, when 2 symptomatic students attended in-person learning, and led to 153 cases among students and 25 among staff members. Why? This is because prevention strategies were not adhered to, including lifting of a mask requirement because of a heat wave and classroom crowding. In an Italian study, which implemented in schools where there's an implementation of comprehensive prevention approach, the result is that school reopening was not associated with the second wave of COVID-19 in Italy. Another interesting study shows that at a county level, the COVID-19 hospitalization in the USA was compared between counties with in-person learning and those without in-person learning. And this study shows that there's no effect of in-person school reopening on COVID-19 hospitalization rates when the baseline hospitalization rates were low or moderate. It means in about 75% of the counties. That also tells us that the use of multiple strategies provide greater protection in breaking transmission chains than implementing a single strategy. Measures have also to be implemented in a coherent way in classrooms, schoolyards, sport facilities, buses, canteens, and after-school activity. A strong systematic review of observational studies shows most studies reported that school reopening with extensive infection prevention and control measure in place, and when the community infection level were low or moderate, did not increase community transmission of SARS-CoV-2. Of course, if large outbreaks occur or transmission in the community cannot be controlled by any other measures, reactive school closures may be considered as the last resort. Bearing in mind the harmful effect, policymakers should then take a measured approach before implementing school closure and should look to reopen schools in times of low transmission when appropriate mitigation measures are in place. In this context, and also because of the dynamic of the epidemics with the new variants, routine testing is a very efficient way to manage the epidemic. The third solid fact is linked to the knowledge we have of the mechanism of implementation in schools of all the different measures. And these mechanisms are linked and involve institutional, contextual, and personal factors. Next slide, please. 1 year on how to ensure that schools implement measures remain a key question. There's difference between the guidelines and what happened in the field. And in this third section, we will describe data relative to the way in which infection measures are implemented at the school level. For example, next slide, please. A study done in South Africa showed that the level of implementation differed from one region to another in conjunction with socio-economical factors, and the differences are very high. Other surveys, for example, one targeting primary school principals in the UK, showed that some measures were considered easy to implement and others very challenging. As it had been already said at the global level, next slide, please, the UNICEF UNESCO World Bank survey on national education responses to COVID school closure found that nearly all the governments have produced or endorsed specific health and hygiene guidelines and measures for schools, but only around half of low-income and lower in middle-income countries reported having enough resources to implement them, in comparison to 80% of upper middle income countries and 95% of high income countries. The success of implementation of measures in school is totally dependent on the commitment and support of the school teams. And of course, the situation is complex. A survey concerning 42 countries showed there is fear among some teachers of transmission in schools, which is understandable, since data show living or working with children attending in-person school is linked to a higher risk of COVID-19 outcomes. Teachers also feel exhausted and undervalued. Another interesting result is that the creation of measures is perceived to be half-led, with limited understanding and appreciation of the school context. Furthermore, implementation was facilitated by staff commitment and communication among stakeholders, but hampered by limitation with guidance received, physical environment, resources, parental adherence, balancing prevention measures with learning. This is not a surprise, since pre-COVID research shows three main factors influences the adoption of new practices by teachers in schools: institutional, personal, and contextual. We have to play and to be sure that all the different strategies are targeting these three factors. In the field of health, the personal factors are major, and then the implementation of guidelines is not a linear process, but needs an enactment of the measure in the different context. The implementation strategies must be appropriate to the setting. We must empower teachers and students in school to build a strong culture of prevention and take the school context into account. For example, in some region, it may be not very sensible to ventilate classrooms without mosquito nets when the risk of transmission of vector-borne diseases is high, such as malaria or dengue fever. SARS-CoV-2 is not necessarily the greatest risk in the context for schools. To adapt the measures to the context, local actors in health and education need to cooperate in their schools. And we must do more to break down the silos between the two sectors. To do this effectively, they need consistent and timely information backed up by resources and equipment. Testing and national vaccination strategies should ensure school teachers and other professionals working in school are considered when prioritizing access. Finally, supporting every school to integrate health issues in their management and teaching is a priority. The WHO UNESCO Health Promoting School is an important new initiative to support countries in this critical area. Such school policies should include the basic elements of protection, including maintenance of sanitary facilities, ability to contact family in the event of an emergency, traffic plans, preparation for a temporary or localized closure, prevention, promotion of a culture of prevention among staff, students, families, school partners, and giving information on various possible epidemics and infectious disease, and education, including knowledge and skills related to health, the body, microbe, vectors, psychosocial skills, media education, critical things. These elements are common to all epidemics and are the subject of long-term work. If these principles are adopted, when future health crises occur, specific prevention measures will be implemented against a background or greater understanding. So to conclude now, reducing transmission in school is, of course, a shared responsibility and needs a combination of effective prevention strategies implemented with the ability and commitment to adhere to them. Implementing this strategy will benefit not only our response to COVID, but also for future possible epidemics, and will contribute to overall health and well-being of learners and their communities. Strong implementation strategy based on educators' involvement and the provision of technical and pedagogical resources in each school is necessary. The COVID pandemic is an opportunity to invest in school systems in order to improve their resilience in case of crisis. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Didier Jourdan. And I forgot to introduce you properly at the beginning. You are the UNESCO Chair for Health and Education and head of the WHO Collaborating Center for Global Health and Education at the University Clermont-Auvergne in France. And thank you very much for that inspiring presentation. Unfortunately, we will not be able to take questions. Please put them in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to respond to them during the session. We will now move to the second part of the seminar or of the webinar, and that is to listen to statements from governments, from ministers of education and other high-level representatives. And I would like to open up the floor first for Yoji Maruyama-san, who's the Senior Deputy Minister of Education from Japan. Sir, over to you. Welcome. Thank you.
Firstly, we highly appreciate the strong leadership of UNESCO, led by Director General Ms. Asuri, taking steps against the unprecedented crisis education is facing due to the expansion of COVID-19. And also would like to thank you for inviting me to this event. Taking this precious opportunity, in accordance with the theme given, I would like to introduce the efforts that we are making in Japan to fight against the expansion of COVID-19. Firstly, we have defined as our country's policy that we will keep our schools open in order to secure children's rights to receive education continuously by mitigating to the extent possible the risk of infection and its expansion in schools. In Japan, emergency declaration was issued for the second time this January in the urban areas, including Tokyo. But even under that situation, schools took extensive countermeasures against the virus and kept going on with their educational activities. As for the continuation of school operations at Japan's ministry, next, we disseminated notice to the Board of Education at prefectural levels on the continuity of educational activities at schools and to take extensive countermeasures against infectious disease. We also created manuals for hygiene controls for the reference of the school operators and updating those manuals reflecting the status of the infection and based on new findings. At schools, based on the manual for hygiene control and others, activities are conducted in accordance with the level of infection in each area. In particular, in senior high schools, where we are seeing relatively higher number of infection cases, when implementing extracurricular activities or club activities, we are adopting stronger alert measures against the virus by temporarily restricting activities, which may expose students to higher risk of infection depending on the level of infection in the area and the specifics of the extracurricular activities. Also, to support schools' human resources, we have additionally allocated around 70,000 teaching staff, instructors, and school support staff under the supplementary budget, and also providing support for expenditures to participate in training that could also contribute to countermeasures against COVID-19 infections. Also, depending on the status of each school, we are additionally allocating school counselors or school social workers as needed to provide psychological or mental care. With these efforts, we are doing the best we can to secure children's learning opportunities so that we leave no one behind.
Thank you very much, and also thank you very much for sticking to your 2 minutes time slot. I just wanted to highlight we have 15 more discussants or presentations from ministers in this first session, so kindly restrict yourself to 2 minutes. The next presentation will be from Mr. Nicolas Trotta, who is the Minister of Education from Argentina. Mr. Trotta, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, UNESCO, for organizing this event. And I would like to point out that the pandemic is a catastrophe, of course, but let's be clear, the real catastrophe of the world is inequality and social injustice. That has been harder to advance in the reality of the pandemic. Reopening our schools in safe conditions is today a democratic imperative in Argentina and in Latin America. The effects of the pandemic have been devastating in our school system, plagued by inequality and educational injustice. For a year, most of our schools have been closed, but we have continued educating in an unprecedented effort to guarantee everyone's right to a quality education. In February of this year, the school year began in Argentina under the motto, "Without health, there is no present, and without education, there is no future." In this framework from the national government, we have established and started a broad and ambitious vaccination campaign. 1,458,000 teachers and education workers from all over the country has been established as a priority group. We have reached almost 500,000 education workers, 1/3 of the goal. Reopening schools and doing it with the support of the teachers, their unions, and the professional organization was a challenge that we reached with the best tool that our democracy has in order to build consensus, dialogue, and more dialogue. In addition, we reopened our schools with an enormously relevant political decision to guarantee the largest increase in public investment in education in the last 50 years. More resources for connectivity towards reducing the digital gap. More resources for infrastructure, for social education support programs, for teacher training, for straightening the educational trajectories of the poorest children and young people in our society. To be able to accompany, monitor, and assess this process, we created an observatory to monitor the reopening of schools, and we launched the Cuidar Escuelas platform, fed in real time by all the schools in the country, with the aim of providing an early warning on COVID-19 cases registered in the educational system, allowing the development of prevention, control, and health monitor actions. I want to close my speech by celebrating these exchange spaces. We work every day to build an Argentina that makes education the platform for its future of social and justice equality. This is the same value that led us to strengthen the necessary international cooperation tied with each one of you, to learn from each other from our success and mistakes, to share the lessons learned and face together the challenge that awaits us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I would really like to highlight that we need to try to stick to the 2-minute limit. Next is Ms. Jana Andreasen, who is the Deputy Minister of Education, Science, Culture and Sports from Armenia. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here and to present the solution strategies implemented in my country. Of course, the main important principles have been presented at the keynote speaker's presentation, and I'm glad to say that in our country we also use the strategy that the schools should be the last place to close and the first to reopen. And we have schools open starting from this new academic year, starting from September, of course, with specific rules that have been developed through interagency cooperation, which is very important to have agreed rules together with the Ministry of Health, and also to monitor the usage of those rules at schools. What is the main principle of our solution? That we have used multiple measures and diversified approach to different situations and different regions, which means that we use this kind of approach that each school has the opportunity to provide learning in physical space in case we have less than 10% of cases at school level. And it means that most of schools can be open during the whole year, and all those schools that have cases for more than 10%, then they are obliged to have temporary distance learning during the process of 2 weeks, and after that they can return to the physical learning process. And of course, we have diversified approach for specific groups, which are children at risk groups and also teachers at risk groups. And for children at risk groups, we have centralized distance learning, which is provided by state, and we have created a specific platform, and we have hired teachers and have virtual classrooms for all the kids that need this distance learning due to some health reasons. And for teachers being included in the risk groups, we provide the opportunity to work at a distance mode, which means that they can provide their classes at the distance mode. And in case we have which we have in case of the big schools, we use the approach of dividing classes into 2 groups, and it means that we decrease the total number of pupils that go to school each day, and of course we have less number of days during the week. Each group go to school for 3 days a week, but it helps us to provide physical learning at the same time. And I would like also to mention some additional services that we have provided for the target groups during this year, which is hotline.
Your Excellency, we have only
okay, this is my
left.
last sentence. Okay. We have provided the hotline for social psychological support for teachers and students, and we are also some training sessions for teachers during the year available for all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and wonderful lessons learned from Armenia. I would now like to go to the next speaker for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that is Her Excellency Ms. Ankika Gudeljevic. Your Excellency Gudeljevic, are you available online?
Good afternoon. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful. Please, over to you.
Dear participants of the conference, allow me to greet you on behalf of the Ministry of Civil Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina and on my own behalf, and to express my satisfaction that we may discuss this important topic today. The COVID-19 pandemic is not just a health crisis, but also a learning and education crisis. From the very beginning of the pandemic, the BiH education system has been facing major challenges related to the complete change of the current teaching system. The classical method of teaching has been replaced and a new, different system has been established. Perhaps this new system will contribute to a more direct teacher-student relationship. Perhaps it will improve the quality of student research. But all of these are issues and dilemmas that are discussed on a day-to-day basis. Classes in Bosnia and Herzegovina are mostly organized online or in combination in the classroom and online. Problems caused by this combination of teaching have been solved on a daily basis. In order to provide equal education for all, new tools of teaching process have been developed to support children and young people through a combination of online learning. We distribute printed copies of school materials and broadcast lessons on TV. That meant a procurement additional IT equipment, as well as the great efforts of teachers to adapt new working methods in the virtual classroom. However, Ensuring universal access to education during a pandemic remains a challenge, especially for children from vulnerable groups such as Roma, children with disabilities, and children in families with a low income. Unfortunately, despite all efforts to achieve the best for students, in the last school year, 1.24% of primary and secondary school students in Bosnia and Herzegovina could not attend online classes. Recognizing this problem, the Ministry of Civil Affairs, in cooperation with education authorities and international organizations, has undertaken activities to solve problems with school equipment in the best possible way. We have also been expressed interest for additional training of teachers in using tools for online teaching, as well as the training of school management. Due to the damaging impact of closing schools for students, I believe that this way of learning should be taken only when we cannot use other tools for teaching in schools. Education must have a plan B in case of further tendency to worsen the epidemiological situation, but also a plan to open schools as soon as possible. This, of course, implies greater investments in resources to ensure the health security of teachers, school staff, and students. It is clear that the burden of responsibility for teaching process is on teachers. Not less burden, this responsibility is also on parents. Teachers are heroes, and the education system in time where we are all struggling with the COVID pandemic. Teachers daily invested great efforts to make students have the best possible education and to maintain school social contacts among students. I believe that through joint efforts, both locally and globally, we will be able to take adequate measures and in a timely manner to ensure the highest quality and most inclusive education for all. Education adapted to the new reality. Finally, once a teacher said, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. Because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do something that I can do." And that is what teachers in BRH are doing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and for highlighting that teachers are heroes. Next, we are moving to Gabon, and I'm handing over to Mr. Patrick Mugiama Daoud, who is the Minister for Higher Education or Higher Learning and National Education. Monsieur le Ministre, c'est à vous.
Minister, you have the floor, sir. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I'd like to thank UNESCO for giving me the possibility to share Gabon's experience. Gabon closed its schools for 8 months, beginning in March, for all the different levels of study, except for the last year of high school, which were able to go back to class and take their exams. Since November, classes have been open again. The main difficulty that have already been mentioned here are shared by us. The difficulty of setting up distance learning. Well, we were already starting on the basis of a situation where we didn't have any, or it was very embryonic. The absence of teacher training, lack of proper materials for students, lack of access to networks, all sorts of other technical problems, which have been able to be at least partially solved, if not fully, thanks to the cooperation we've had with UNESCO, who helped us to train teachers to set up distance learning, with UNICEF, who allowed us to make progress with health measures, and more often with others who are helping us to create a more lasting, durable system of distance learning and to make our system more resilient, to move toward a hybrid system where you have both in-person and distance learning, so as to have shock absorbers in the system, if you will, and will make us more resilient in future. So classes have reopened since November. There has not been a new explosion of the pandemic, so I entirely share the correlation that was expressed earlier to say that there was not a relationship between opening schools and seeing the pandemic take off anew. There has not been an exponential pickup in COVID since schools reopened. So this is our situation. We have got some mastery of the situation, and we are reorienting ourselves toward the creation of a more ongoing form of mixed learning with both distance and in-presence classroom learning.
Next, we will have Mauritania, and it will be Mr. Mohamed Melamin Eye, who will speak on behalf of Mauritania, who is the Minister of National Education, National or Technical Training and Reform. Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to take part in this significant event, and I would like to thank UNESCO for its organization, for the quality of participation with many high responsibles from the United Nations, which justify how significant the educative system is. Mauritania, just like other countries, tried to face this pandemic. Over last year, we lost about 6 months of study, during which schools were closed. There was a recovery with a plan in order to guarantee at the level of schools minimum conditions in order to maintain the good health of students and teachers in a context very difficult, just like in many different countries over our continent. We had very crowded classrooms, and unfortunately population do not have the right resources to protect themselves. They did not necessarily have face masks, and there were also a lack of availability of some resources. So we were faced with a number of challenges. The government tried to mobilize a number of resources together with our partners, and we were able to catch over lost time. At the moment, we do not have specific measures. We know that we do not have specific results. We see that the outcome of baccalaureate is quite correct, but that was for children who were able to have access to remote learning. But we have decrease in the outcomes when it comes to the brevet, so when children are about 15 years old, and this is explained by a lack of access to connectivity for a number of children. There was a platform implemented by the ministry, but we are also trying to disseminate lessons throughout radio and TV, and we believe that those means only have a partial opening because the access according to regions varies according to the policies of communication, and it is not necessarily offered to all students. Mauritania is committed in a reform of its education system with significant implication following these pandemics. Our goal was to guarantee the access to education through reading, writing, and counting, which is becoming more and more complicated because of the current circumstances. We are preparing a new variation of this project, taking into account COVID-19 with a strategy in order to catch up on the losses in education. We are trying to understand how we can help children, whatever their level of education. The support of partners is mobilized, UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Bank, etc., in order to draft new education programs, and we are working also with many other partners, such as ESESCO, amongst others. The challenges for teachers in particular are very numerous. First and foremost, teachers have to protect, and in this sense, teachers will be amongst the priority population to benefit from vaccination. Vaccination started in the country a few years ago, and the Ministry of Education was able to maintain presence in the classroom, but also premiums for teachers who were far away from their schools. So we had, during COVID, a plus 12% in the education budget in order to help teachers. There is also another challenge, which is to train with the access to the right training, but another challenge is to grant access through the right equipment, tablets, computers, but also internet connection. In the case of Mauritania, this is a school resilience project that is taking place, and of course we are working together with communication policies, information policies. The priority is access to teachers and access to learners for education. Thank you very much.
Excellency. And now for Canada, we will have the Minister of Education for Quebec, Mr. Jean-François Roberge. Excellency, over to you.
Bonjour, je vous remercie.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you to Mr. Jourdain for the presentation. I'm delighted to take the floor on behalf of Canada and on behalf of the Committee of Education Ministers for Canada. You know that in Canada the education mission is decentralized. Every single province and territory is working on this. We worked together, the ministries, the education ministries of territories and province. We worked in consultation over the last year, and this will stay after the pandemics, this brotherhood, this consultation amongst the various education ministers, because we were able to exchange quality information just like we are doing at the international level right now. When it comes to Canada, we had a jump forward when it comes to techno-pedagogics, because the regions, the provinces were not equipped in the same way when it comes to computers, access to tablets, but also access to internet. Canada is a huge country, and in some regions still today we have issues when it comes to accessing internet. And of course the very last solution is a closing of school, but I do agree when stating that schools should be the last places to close and the first places to open, but unfortunately we had to close in a temporary manner. We wanted to shift to remote learning, but sometimes this was difficult because we did not have computers. In winter 2020, it was a lack of computers, but also lack of internet connection. In Quebec, we have worked very hard to maintain schools open since September 2020. The schools were not closed that much. There were some closings around Christmas, but we shifted towards remote learning, and this was only for a period of about 2 weeks, and we stayed flexible when it comes to a closing of classroom. So when we have to close a classroom, we close it for 2 weeks when there's an infection, for instance, and we shift straight away within the next 24 hours to remote learning. Now, what is the aim of our policies? Well, our aim is to maintain the schools open and closing temporarily for 1 to 2 weeks, just one classroom if it is touched by COVID-19, or maybe a school, but we do not want to penalize the whole network. So today is the day one of stopping hybrid teaching, this alternance type of learning for students between 15 to 17 years old. They would go to school just 1 day out of 2. They had learning every day, but it was 1 day in the classroom, 1 day remote, 1 day in the classroom, etc. So now we are trying to shift everything in the classroom, but we are very careful because of the variants. We have unveiled a strategy for well-being at school with an additional number of services. We table on tutoring, especially with help coming from outside the schools. We called upon students in the university, but also people who are retired from teaching, who maybe can help students who or learners who might be facing difficulties when it comes to training, education, or also when it comes to mental difficulties. So we are trying to call on them, but also external partners, young people, retired teachers, in order to guarantee this school continuity. I'm sorry I'm talking for very long, but I would like to say that this week, Wednesday, Thursday, we will have a national forum for school achievement post-pandemics. We will be gathering all experts, civil society, in order to shape our policies for the next 18 months, and in order to make sure that during the summer we are able to catch up on what was lost, but also to take care about teaching and mental health. We know that we are not out of the tunnel yet. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for your testimonies.
Excellency. We will now move to Mr. Juan Manuel Brunetti, who is the Minister of Education and Science for Paraguay. Over to you.
Authorities of UNESCO, Minister of Education, dear participants. In Paraguay, the importance of keeping educational institutions open has been assumed in view of their central role in the education of children, adolescents, and young people, and considering schools and colleges as potential safe environments for socializations and mutual supports in time of global crisis. The safe environment is ensured through the implementation of sanitary protocols and physical distance during face-to-face classes. In institutions where families have not chosen for face-to-face activities, various distance education strategies are applied under common curricular standards. Their uncertainty also affects the work of teachers, a sector that historically was accustomed to face-to-face teaching practices, and that, given the health situation, made great effort to adjust and adapt to the new codes of distance education. In most cases, with their own resources, in-devices, and connectivity, which we recognize has been of vital importance. In 2021, the process of safe return to school has begun, based on a coordinated work with Ministry of Public Health, and which the Institutional Educational Committee for Risk Management, which each educational committee has integrated in order to make decisions in context. Teachers' vaccination is priority for Paraguay, and it should be for every country. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Awide.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and also for sticking to time. We will be now listening to Ms. Ligia Perez, who's the Vice Minister of Education for the Dominican Republic. Your Excellency, over to you.
Saludos. En el caso de la República Dominicana, el año escolar 2020-2021, que inició el pasado 2 de noviembre, se ha desarrollado bajo la modalidad de educación a distancia, en el marco del Plan Educación para Todos Preservando la Salud, con la estrategia Aprendemos en Casa. Los edificios escolares han permanecido abiertos al personal directivo.
Les écoles sont restées.
Those who were administrators and schools were reorienting themselves. We're very sorry, we can't hear the speaker properly.
Desarrollamos el proceso educativo.
Developing the school process using models that can be transmitted. We're very sorry, the sound is intermittent. We can't hear the speaker properly.
Y también visitando los padres,
and also visiting parents. Our great challenge was to develop this for all the educational community. Oh, we're sorry, the sound is too intermittent to interpret the speech. We apologize.
Preparamos para el retorno a las aulas gradual, voluntario, progresivo.
Gradual, voluntary, progressive, and staggered.
para lo cual hemos diseñado un protocolo
So we designed a general protocol
con el Ministerio de Salud Pública, así como de otras instituciones, tanto nacionales
and in other institutions
el quehacer educativo, y que han estado participando en una
and which participated in a technical group
el mes de octubre pasado y en la cual expresamos
in which they expressed
respecto del año escolar. En este protocolo
in this protocol
para la apertura de los centros y para el desarrollo del
and for the development of the educational process.
En primer lugar, las medidas de bioseguridad, vigilancia
Biosecurity measures,
del Ministerio de Salud Pública.
the Public Health Ministry.
De estudiantes y docentes se implementará el programa Retorno a
A program of Return to Happiness,
la Orientación y Psicología, el cual cuenta con la capacitación
which involves the training
de las familias, las cuales han sido un pilar fundamental
which were a fundamental pillar of the school year. There will be semi-presential learning.
han sido vacunados con la primera,
We're already vaccinated with the first dose.
se inocularán con la segunda dosis de la vacuna y se mantendrán
With rules of distancing.
las medidas de bioseguridad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And there was some translation on the English channel, unfortunately not on the French one.
Please be aware that there's only English and French in this session and that other languages are not meant to be interpreted.
Victoria Angula Gonzalez, the Minister of National Education from Colombia. Your Excellency, over to you.
I want to thank UNESCO for the opportunity and having accompanied us in a typical and challenging year for education at global level. Since the second semester of 2020, in Colombia, we started a pilot project for the safe return to elementary, primary, secondary, and higher education. We knew that one of the biggest challenges was, and still is, to generate trust in the society and work together with teachers and school heads, while also creating a space that dignifies their work and support their teacher practice and hybrid model. Colombia has located the necessary funds so that all schools could implement biosecurity protocols. And today, 97% of the territorial education authority have started to work under the alternation model. However, we still have a huge challenge of giving all the schools and all the students the chance to return in person to schools. We have focused our efforts in technical assistance of territorial education authorities, school, head teachers, and regular basis to guarantee the application of protocols. But additional, we have been working in hybrid pedagogical models. Once we have achieved to the return to all the school in alternation scenario, is very important focus our efforts in closing learning gaps. One of the priorities is focusing in rural education, taking advantage of the opportunity for improved infrastructure and connectivity conditions. We have designed an application called Evaluation to Move Forward, which seeks the process of developing children in basic skills and socio-emotional competence. We also develop projects like Contacto Maestro to work and giving teachers continual emotional support and strengthen their pedagogical capacities. I want to highlight in all this effort to join work we have done between Health and Education Ministry, given that the return to school is a public health priority and is the key for our society to understand the importance of coming back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, also for sticking to your 2 minutes. And next, we will have Her Excellency Aoud Deng Akwil, who is the Minister of General Education and Instruction from South Sudan. Your Excellency, over to you. Your Excellency, if you are speaking, you are on mute. Could you kindly unmute yourself? We will call upon South Sudan later, and we'll move to the Kyrgyz Republic with the Minister of Education, who will make his remarks, Mr. Almazbek Beshneliev. Over to you, Excellency.
So much, Your Excellency, dear ministers. I'm very delighted to be a part of this meaningful conference. On behalf of Minister of Education and Science, I wish fruitful results and thanks to organizers, especially UNESCO. From March 2020, we converted our education system to online. And in an online teaching process, we faced main two problems and two conditions. First of them was internal conditions and external conditions. In internal conditions, we had problems with non-prepared staff to teaching, to giving education in online platform. And secondly, the problem was about the quality of education and teaching. About external condition, we had some problems with the lack of devices, especially electronic devices for students. And secondly, the quality of internet access, especially in rural areas. So after a pandemic period, we converted all our education content to online platform, prepared almost more than 10,000 video courses. To our governmental channels are translated all courses, especially during the pandemic period. We could also set up online teaching platforms as a center of digital content. Now we are working with World Bank and providing some projects with them. We are now trying to set up also a center of digital content. About reopening in our country, after my appointment in October 2020, so there was a difficult question how we can come back to normal life for offline teaching. So in this decision taking, there was some problems, but we were very successful. Today, we 100% opened all our preschools. Also, we opened 100% all secondary schools. In higher education, in professional education, we are now in 50%. We are providing as a hybrid, just the students of 4th grade. It means who are finishing their bachelor's and master's, they are coming. Also, who are studying in medicine faculty, so they are all coming as a offline. In reopening process, we wrote the instruction with our Minister of Health and with UNICEF how we can reopen our schools. We used a location differentiation method to reopening our schools, and it was very successful, how can I say, example in our region. For example, in this differentiation methods, we had to, for example, as a Minister of Education, to take one order, but we didn't do it. We said locally, every county, every region must take their own decision with their clinics, epidemiological clinics. If in the region there was situation under control, we came back to normal life for an offline teaching, and it was very successful in our region. Also, there was some benefits of pandemic, what we learned from pandemic. So we are now establishing our e-school, where we will cover some issues, for example, for disabled children, for future pandemic situations, God will not give any situation to world. And thirdly, for ethnic Kyrgyz who are living abroad, for migrant children who are moving from Kyrgyzstan to abroad and breaking up during the quarters, and especially who have problems, who had surgeries, for example, especially in oncology side. And for these kind of problems, we are setting up one example electronic school where we will teach whole our country in one school and control all the situation. Also, with the pandemic situation, we could retrain 18% of our teachers for digital competency. It was also good, how can I say, privilege for benefit for us. And from this side. So
Your Excellency, sorry, we will have to. Could you make your remark?
Yes.
Thank you.
Just the thing, today we start our vaccination, and doctors, teachers, police officers will take the vaccinations from this day. And I wish all the best to you and fruitful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And can I please remind everyone, please to stick to 2 minutes. We are running late on the program. And so just a reminder for every speaker. Next, we will have His Excellency, the Minister of Education from Bolivia, Mr. Adrian Ruben Cuelca Tarqui. Over to you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Kindly unmute your microphone. In that case, we will come back to His Excellency, the Minister from Bolivia, and we will move to Mr. Faisal Al-Maqsid, who is the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Education of Kuwait. Sir, Your Excellency, over to you. Your Excellency, the Minister of Education from Kuwait, or the Undersecretary, rather, from Kuwait. If you are speaking, you are on mute. Okay, in that case, we will move to an intervention from France, which is a video message from the Minister of National Education, Mr. Jean-Michel Blanquer. Kindly show the video.
Madame la Directrice Générale de l'UNESCO.
Madam Director General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, let me first of all thank UNESCO for organizing this conference, which in spite of distance allows us to meet with one another. For more than a year now, we've been undergoing this health crisis. France has always wanted to keep schools open as long as possible. We wanted to limit as much as we could the impact that this could have on students' school results, but also their sociability and their mental and physical health up above and beyond. Falling behind in school, we've seen that the pandemic has led to other very serious things like cyberbullying, other mental health issues, for instance, for our children. I want to especially welcome organization together with UNESCO, who were immediately very aware of the stakes we were playing for. And we were therefore able to organize an international conference, which led to the adoption of a charter for social network with many ministers of education. As you know, France is one of the countries in the world which, since the very beginning of the crisis, has kept its schools the most open. And this has allowed us to stop people falling out of the school system in 2020. And in fact, less students fell between the cracks in 2020 than 2019. So we were able to meet our goals. We were able to reinforce students' level in school. We've seen there was a small falling off, and then things have picked up again according to the evaluations we've seen in February. We owe this to our teachers, who we must congratulate, teachers in France and in elsewhere who have done an immense amount of work for many months now to support each student and let no student fall behind. We need to thank all of our staff who every day have been applying very strict health protocols, and it's thanks to these that we've been able considerably to limit contamination and to keep our schools open. Today, for instance, at the time when I'm speaking, there are some 80 schools which are closed because the cases of contamination there overall represent less than 0.2% of all school contaminations. We also have saliva tests now available. 300,000 of these are carried out every week. They're offered free of charge to students for the strategy that we are calling Test, Alert, Protect, so as to break the contamination chain. Obviously, this is difficult, particularly at this point in time with what we're calling the English variant, which obliges us to be particularly vigilant in certain regions. Obviously, there is always the risk that there will nonetheless be a need to close schools. But for the time being, we are managing to hold firm and not have our students fall behind and to keep schools open for them, because COVID-19 is not the only problem our societies have. There are a whole series of criteria we must bear in mind for the future of our children in the short term, but also in the long term. The crisis considerably changed the resilience of our institutions. We generalized digital tools with some interesting successes, with a tool called Ma Classe à la Maison, Class at Home, which 3 million students are using and which students have been able to use during the health crisis. On a world scale, we've been doing this work collectively, and I think we can collectively be proud. Together with the conference we had of French-speaking education ministers, with UNESCO, with other initiatives for the creation of a platform we're calling Imagine École, Imagine School, with 10 French-speaking countries in Western and Central Africa to use online resources, modulating them as they choose. And this is the spirit of solidarity and cooperation which should be leading us in the defense of schools' role in the future in spite of the crisis we are presently undergoing. Investments in school have never been as necessary as they are now. If this crisis has taught us anything at all, it's that school is the precondition for our country's futures, that schools have a central role to play in our societies. Teachers will never be replaced by robots or computers. We have a very clear vision of that now. In this technological world that we have already entered, more than ever before, we need human beings. Human beings in the center of our 21st century societies mean we're going to have to invest in education more than ever before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that message from the Excellency of the Ministry of France. I would just like to see whether Mr. Faisal Al-Maqsid is willing to make his statement. No, in that case, we'll move to the next session, which is a joint presentation on the crucial role of teachers prioritizing and supporting education staff. And this will be by Miss Angelina Ng Matsi Motshekga, the Minister of Basic Education from South Africa. Your Excellency, welcome. And she will be joined by Mr. Mokoena Maluleke, who is the General Secretary of the South African Democratic Teachers Union. You have 5 minutes for your joint presentation, and over to you, Your Excellency.
No, thank you very much. The midst of lots of uncertainty
Mrs. Maluleke, I think there's a delay in the voice. Maybe switch off your video.
Of our lockdown, we started facing in the opening of society, but in particular, and our managers, we were able to really open student consultation. We worked, we communicated more, we collaborated more, on the curriculum. And as you see from the presentation that will come from our teacher unions, is that our key partners like teacher unions and parents occupied the space, which really made it difficult, but also very helpful and productive. We had constant meetings, constant, because they are on the ground, they're in schools in every time, tens of their members. It was not a very easy process. Gave confidence to our teachers that it was made government account more, and where there were gaps, we were able to fit in gaps quickly. And then unfortunately, that process, we lost teachers disproportionately. There were lots of teachers that we lost in the process, but with the guidance and support of teachers, we managed to stem the tide. And I don't really want to take time because we only have 5 minutes with my colleague from the Secretary General at home, but can say through the process of collaboration and working together with our teacher unions, our parents, our non-governmental organizations, we've been able to even up our performance beyond that. Our health system has improved because we had to work close with the health system, and the collaboration has been strengthened by the process. We had to work very close with our teacher unions and make sure that we serve on different committees which were going to look after the opening of schools. And since we reopened this year, despite the fact in 2021, despite the fact that we had to get 2 weeks delayed because of the second wave, we have already got back to the ground and make sure that we work together. And government also has helped us a lot by giving us additional capacity to deal with the gaps and the problems that we had last year, able to implement our 3 years recovery program. Chair, I don't want to take time. I'll ask minutes. I'll come back later, but let me just give it a presentation. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
SG, over to you.
Thank you, Ministers and Excellencies, and thanks to the Chair, Dr. Banerjee. Indeed, the last slide, the one who's controlling the slide, the last slide, please. Yeah, the last one. I'll only talk to the last slide. Right, in terms of the last slide, basically, Minister, as I add to what you have said about collaboration and about dialogue that we have had together with the ministry and the stakeholders in education, is just to mark on the teacher commitment to keeping the schools open. We know that it takes a lot of effort to be able to convince the parents to bring their learners to school, and they did that on the basis that the teachers worked with the ministry in ensuring that we provide a safe environment for our schools. And secondly, it is that where the schools are resourced in terms of COVID intervention, of non-pharmaceutical intervention, we've been able to create that schools must be the barriers for the transmission, which is very critical. But the role of the teacher union, as the minister has indicated, has been to making sure that there is surveys from time to time that we share with the ministry, and making sure that we are able to inform the teachers about how to defeat the pandemic, but also to build resilience in and around the issue of non-pharmaceutical intervention. And clearly it is that when we're talking to the communities, we were not only addressing the teachers, but addressing the public, mobilizing the parents, mobilizing the scientific society to work with the ministry and work with the teacher union in making sure that we ensure that the schools remain open, so that we are then able to give the learners the nutrition that they require for them to be able to study. Yes, it was not easy, but with dialogue and collaboration and the human agency that we have seen a lot of solidarity in our country, that people came together and supporting the ministry in making sure that education indeed becomes a societal issue and so forth. So, of course, there are challenges very quickly. The challenges are around burnout of the teachers and the stress that they have to undergo. And clearly is that in terms of psychosocial services that we have agreed with the ministry, they will then be able to be supported moving forward. But also the increased potential of time loss. We are addressing that with the ministry because we know that the learners are coming on rotational basis. Some come twice a week and the others come on the other day. And therefore that in itself is a challenge that we need to address. And we want to thank you for this particular opportunity for presenting our intervention in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and the General Secretary. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a sound problem, but the presentation will be shared and is in the chat. We will now go to the second session, and I must say that unfortunately we have run an additional 20 minutes behind schedule. So I would really like coming presenters to stick to 2 minutes in their interventions. Next will be the Minister of Education and Research from Estonia, Ms. Liina Kersna. Your Excellency, over to you.
Honorable Chair, dear colleagues, thank you for bringing together this timely exchange. 1 year into COVID-19, a year full of urgency, challenges, and abrupt adjustment to contain the virus. Despite all our efforts, the situation is critical as ever. Fortunately, we are not in the same place as a year ago. We have gained access to more data, gained knowledge, and understood what we must do to best support our learners and teachers. We have taken extensive steps to aid all actors in the education sector, equally stressing mental and physical health, educational and technological support. One of the measures to guarantee our teachers' safety was understanding their role as a fourth-line workers. Our teachers have gained priority access to vaccines. And today, I'm proud to say that most of Estonian general education staff who were interested to get vaccination have been immunized against COVID-19. No less important than physical safety is our mental well-being. Together with school psychologists, we have set up a support line for teachers, expanded the provision of mental health targeted to learners and parents, and we work closely with education technologies aimed to support our students' development. Understanding the extent of potential learning loss, we have initiated a substitute teacher program fitting the needs of this crisis. We pay close attention to exam year students, and we ensure that all our students have access to necessary learning materials and tools. The crisis is far from being over. Therefore, we need to invest in better air quality in school buildings, rapid tests, and take all safety precautions possible. I look forward learn from your experiences to overcome COVID-19 as a powerful international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Next is the Minister of Education of Liberia, Professor Ansu Soni. Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, colleagues. It's a privilege to share this platform. Many things have happened. 2020 was completely interruptive of the school systems, and the only advantage God had that we had experienced Ebola before then, 4 years earlier. So there was a lot of, both from our president and from the health sector, there were a lot of proactive actions which put ahead and others who are not we shut schools, and after a while we had to start, but in the disjointed manner. We started with the 12th graders first, and then gradually into the other classes step by step. Everyone was not in school at the same time. We did not bring in the early childhood folks at school at all. They didn't come back for the rest of the year. And that's how we went throughout the rest of the year. We were able to close the academic year, which is 2019. We circumvent, so we did that were being delivered to students who pick up from the school, and we really local
Your Excellency, the line is poor. And I think the line has been cut. So we will move to the next intervention then, and that is from Her Excellency, the Minister of Education, Ms. Mariam Raudet from Nicaragua. Your Excellency, over to you. Thank you very much, and please stick to time.
Thank you. Buenos días. Agradecemos a los representantes del Fondo Mundial de las Naciones Unidas para la Educación, la Ciencia y la Cultura por habernos invitado a este debate que hemos estado escuchando alrededor de...
Which we have been listening to with considerable interest. We're talking about COVID and recovery. To us today, we need to talk about how to keep schools open and give support to professors. The decision of the Nicaraguan government to keep presential teaching going in a time of COVID is based on the universal principle of human rights, which guarantee the right to education to children, young people, and adults in any scenario or situation which we may be called upon to confront. So that's the basic principle. So as to guarantee these measures, we have defined and developed a national strategy which incorporate 4 different stages to implement as the pandemic unfurls in our country. We have done this in an articulated way, institutionally speaking, with ongoing support from the Ministry of Health and other institutions and national entities. We're very sorry, but we cannot hear the speaker properly.
Perdemos el vínculo del maestro.
And we're also losing the link between students, teachers, and families. The preventive strategy which we've undertaken has been a fundamental step for us in Nicaragua, keeping in-person teaching open. And this is the model which we are implementing with health protocols so as to look after the health and survival of our students with protective material, with training plans, with communication strategies via these special platforms. What are the reasons for which we are finding ourselves having in-person teaching? Culturally speaking, in-person teaching for teachers, students, and families is a more human, more socializing way of teaching, to be able to get to know one another, to share, to be able to have genuine practice, to be able to base ourselves on long-standing practice. So in-person teaching is not simply something important for success in learning, but also for social integration of students. This physical contact allows us to create a climate of trust, and in this case, direct interactive communication promotes these essential aspects so as to have substantial improvement in our results, to strengthen relationship between classmates, teachers, and families, and to have involvement of the educational communication feeding back into the learning process so as to strengthen this integral learning process, to have greater trust in individual learning processes and have a greater collective success as a result of this. 80% of our schools are rural. Let us not forget they are in scattered, remote areas with different problems of connection. Many families also have very limited access to technological tools.
Could you please conclude?
Okay, la clave de este desafío.
The key to this is maintaining an ongoing coup to have successful studies in Nicaragua, and we have not yet seen a school be a focal point for infections. We have gone on having 100% presential teaching, and we will go on doing this, applying all of the safety measures that we have been following up until now, following national and international measures.
Excellency, I just want to highlight that your interventions will all be available on the website, and would now like to move to the next presenter, the Undersecretary of Education from Qatar, Dr. Ibrahim El Nuaimi. Your Excellency.
Yeah. Honorable Chairman, dear colleagues, the return of students to school is necessary, but not only because of the educational, social, and developmental benefits students themselves will gain, but also for the long-term implication on both economic health and civic health for the entire world. As we all know, the well-being and welfare of students under the age of 18 is based on an environment designed for their care and ensure their active learning and health development. When taking any decision in respect to opening schools, we must ensure that the fulfillment of two main elements: provision of quality education and maintaining student safety and security. Distance learning, what we experienced so far, is a good opportunity to provide quality education that meets the interests and meets needs of future generation of students and keeps abreast with the rapid change and the massive leaps and development in modern technology. But such type of education might not suit the age group of young students in early years, for example. Such young children do not have the ability to engage remotely with teachers and peers for a long period of time. In Qatar, we in fact reopen our schools from the start of this academic year, 2021, in September 2020, and we started with 50% students attendance. We reduced it recently to 30% because of the increase of the second wave, I would say, of the pandemic. But what we try to do is we divide the students into groups of limited numbers, and we suspended learning of sports activities. We continuously checking the temperature of all students, teachers, and administrators. Rapid testing of COVID-19 at schools are been already implemented, which helped a lot to really identify those who are positive or negative with the COVID-19. If everyone is strictly complying with the precautions such as wearing masks and using sanitizers, and we are giving high priority to vaccinating our teachers, administrators, and all workers in schools. In fact, we reached almost 80% of vaccinations among our administrators and teachers in the schools, which is really good number. And we are working on it to hopefully by the early next month we'll be vaccinating all our teachers and administrators. And also we're providing buses for a limited number of students, so the social distances are there. And we continuously and innovatively to raise the awareness among the students and their families of the importance of learning in schools while taking the necessary precautions. It is not possible to guarantee the effective achievement of any of the plans or procedures without providing qualitative and specialized support to teachers and all stakeholders of the education processes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and also for sticking to time. I see Your Excellency, the Minister of Education from Liberia, Professor Soni, you're back online. Would you like to finish your statement? And your statement will be available on the website afterwards also. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I went down. But let me just pick up from where I start. We actually brought students back officially into school in December 1, but effectively, because it was the holidays, the majority did not actually come. The majority started on January 4, Monday, 2021. And since then, we've been moving on swiftly. I just want to recognize the support from the GPE, which actually provided some support to help us with the recovery. And that recovery had a beginning with providing complete hand washing stations and health kits, temperature checking equipment and all of that to all of the schools in this country, private and public. And that was complemented by some support from the World Bank. Blended fund has helped us. Now we have distributed almost 55% of the total kits to all of the schools. We still have enough 45%. We hope to complete before the end of this month. But school is in session. The advantage we have somehow is the experience we have with the Ebola. As soon as we heard about COVID, our president and the health ministry took some proactive measures to keep people in check, reminding us of the impact of Ebola, so that we could make sure that we all of that, what would be required to keep safe environment, we will do that coming forward. So far, the kids are in school. The students in higher education have adapted the use of online and traditional classrooms. So that's a blended. So if somebody is taking a 3-credit course in higher education, they go to school one day and the other 2 days they do it online. That has worked perfectly since school resumed. In the case of basic and secondary education, internet is not effective throughout the country. We have certain places, so we have to use radio. We have adapted radio as a test case, and it worked. It didn't work 100%. So what we're trying to do is with support from GPE through UNICEF, we are now trying to build up an academic radio station that can help to keep lessons delivered uninterrupted throughout the day, just in case, until at such time that internet become support complete online. But for now, that's where we are. Our virus level is, we still have the virus. The good thing, we have received some vaccines. We have not started administering them yet. Very soon, the Ministry of Health will get permission from the President and the Cabinet to start to launch it. Once it is launched, then it begins to start creating the safety that we all desire. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Everything else I'm listening, other people have done, we're following as well. But the greatest thing we want to do was we shut down this all sporting program for now, and the students are strictly going to school in different. Of course, for us, our students are not too many, so they can go to school, all of them, and there is a temperature check that's supposed to go on in every school every day, just to make sure that anybody is having fever. We can take note of that person.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Next, we will move to the Syrian Arab Republic, and we will have an intervention by His Excellency, the Minister of Education, Dr. Darim Tabaa. Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. Syria has a long history of learning and education, owing home to the first known alphabets. In mid-March 2020, Syria schools closed as part of the lockdown to contain the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. They reopened in September 13, 2020, with an intensive teaching schedule to compensate the lost items. The total number of schools in Syria working now is nearly 13,115 schools, and more than 3,615,791 students went to schools every day in different levels. The education system worked now in 4 dimensions of skills: empowerment, citizenship, learning, and employability. The Ministry of Education has worked through its educational platforms and the educational channel to compensate educational losses. We grant health leave to student, teacher, administrator who shows respiratory symptoms and raised temperature, and classrooms can be closed for at least 5 days. Schools can be also closed, and students and teachers are subject to quarantine for a period of 14 days in the event that more than 5% of all students and employees are suspected of infection. The war and the economic blockade of Syria has led to decline in state resources, including what is devoted to education. Our future demands are to continue rehabilitating damaged schools and bring them back to work, secure educational losses for students, and develop distance learning system. At the same time, empowering the school environment and developing school health services in addition to developing teacher performance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and also for keeping it within 2 minutes. The next speaker is Her Excellency, the Minister of Education from Angola, Ms. Luisa Maria Alves Grillo. Your Excellency, over to you.
Muito obrigada,
Excellencies, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share the experience that Angola has had to keep schools open. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Exactly a year ago, we interrupted classes after the first cases of COVID-19 were detected in Angola. As a result of a coordinated effort at the high
Perspectiva multissectorial, foi preciso assumir medidas urgentes e assertivas para a melhoria dos serviços de saúde e conter a propagação da pandemia. Assim, no dia 5 de outubro de 2020, reiniciaram as aulas no ensino secundário e, no dia 10 de fevereiro de
classes were resumed in secondary education, and on February 10, 2020, they resumed class in primary education with the reopening of preschools scheduled for next April the 5th. Excellencies, as His Excellency President of the Republic of Angola, João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, said at the Global Education Meeting in 2020, and I quote, "Extraordinary funds are being allocated to schools to ensure the sustainability of the teaching process and return to students, teachers and families the hope and the certainty of a safe school life." End of quote. With these funds, the local authorities have guaranteed the necessary equipment to keep schools safe and fundamentally guarantee the health of teachers, a central element of the teaching process and learning. At the level of the central structure of the Ministry of Education, virtual meetings and follow-up visits to the provinces were carried out in order to verify, reinforce and support local bodies in observing the conditions for maintaining open schools, distance, division classes, respecting the alternative school calendar. This has a permanent action of our inspection and pedagogical supervision officers. However, in conjunction with the health authority, we have carried out massive tests on teachers placed in the areas with the highest incidence of virus, namely Luanda, Benguela, Huila and Wambo, having tested more than 10,000 teachers with a very residual incidence of positivity. Training and capacity building activities for teachers and school administrators are underway to deal with the new approach of the school in the context of the pandemic. They have focused on the emergency context, providing teachers with tools to put their action in favor of the defense of life and the construction of knowledge in service, etc. We are working with in national institutions such as UNICEF and the World Bank within the scope of the Learning for All project, which has supported the training of 680 trainers from all municipalities in the country on return to schools, as well as providing hygiene materials and biosafety to schools. Finally, the national vaccination plan against COVID-19 in progress since the beginning of the month prioritized the vaccination of nursery educators and teachers at different levels of education. So far, almost 20,000 preschool, primary and secondary education teachers have been vaccinated, ensuring immunization and safety for teachers and students. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for the opportunity to express myself today.
Excellency. Next, we will move to the Vice Minister of Education of Cuba, Ms. Dania Lopez. Over to you, Your Excellency. And please stick to 2 minutes. We are running late. Your Excellency Dania Lopez from Cuba, we can't hear you. I can see you're online. Can you unmute yourself and switch on the camera?
Yes, we are here. A greeting for all.
Welcome. Please continue.
In Cuba, education constitutes a well-structured system, which by its nature is free, inclusive, equitable, and of quality for all. For this reason, the Cuban state has ensured the continuity of educational system. Committed with the Educative Agenda 2030 in the face of COVID-19, the Ministry of Education has adopted alternatives to ensure the development of the educational process for the comprehensive training of students, as well as the scientific methodological preparation of teachers and managers. In the 1920 school year, at the time of closure of educational institutions, Cuba has complied with more than 70% of the study plan. Despite the epidemiological situation, the educational process did not stop. A system of actions was implemented to give continuity with the television teaching activities, with the aim of protecting the health of students and workers. The daycare centers continue to function to provide service to the children of working mothers. At the same time, we worked on the curricular adaptations for the 2021 school year, where all the contents established in the curricular tiers were addressed with an integrative approach. This was possible because there is a system planning of pedagogical work that ensures permanent and continuous curricular adjustment, directed and controlled by specialists and researchers from the Central Institute of Pedagogical Science, CINESOF company, the Directorate of Educational Technology and Educational Channel. From these institutions, the teaching, computers, audiovisual, and complementary materials of different disciplines are made up, which supplied and supplement the television and face-to-face activities of the teacher. To reopen schools, a national strategy was designed with organizational, didactic, methodological, training activities for managers, teachers, families, and community actors. Hygienic sanitary conditions were guaranteed in educational institutions to resume and start the school year. We would like to highlight that the closure of the 1920 academic year passed without transmission in schools. Attention and guidance were guaranteed to children, adolescents, and young people living in remote areas and communities that do not have access to electricity. The challenges are huge, and we have taken advantage of learning obtained to continue advancing from the curriculum in the preparation of our teachers to face situations like this, promote the production of means and resources for the digital transformation of the teacher learning process, and share experiences, lessons learned, research in the areas of education, educational technologies, school health, and disaster management, including epidemiology. The new circumstances have taught us we are committed to changing and transforming educational institutions. We go to a school as a family, and we reinforce the use of audiovisual media. We learn to look from other perspectives of the role of educational science, the optimal use of technologies, and the irreplaceable figure of the teacher. Teachers are, in their own right, an essential part of the spiritual vanguard of the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And we'll move to the next speaker. I must say that we are running really over time, so kindly stick to your 2 minutes. And next is the Minister of Education and Human Resources Development, Her Excellency Lanelle Danagada from the Solomon Islands. Your Excellency, over to you, but please keep it to 2 minutes. And if you are speaking, then you are on mute. Okay, we will move to the next speaker and come back if Her Excellency is still online. And we're moving to Suriname, and Her Excellency, the Minister of Education, Science and Culture, Ms. Maria Levens. Your Excellency, over to you. I can see you're online, so could you unmute your mic and your video? Okay, then we will move to the next speaker, and that's Her Excellency, the Minister of Education, Madame Caroline Désir for the Federation of Wallonia, who will speak for Belgium. Your Excellency, over to you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you very much for allowing us to have this exchange today. In Belgium, all schools were closed between March and May 2020. But reopening happened in May, and then in June,
Des élèves n'ont pas mis un pied à l'école entre.
so most students did not go to school between March and September, in fact, in 2020. And this reality, together with all the difficulties we had with implementation of distance learning, meant that as we had elsewhere a huge increase in difficulties with learning and students dropping out of school, and with very marked differences according to the socioeconomic status of the students. This was confirmed by many studies and showed us that in Belgium, nothing can replace students in their classroom facing their students, whatever the quality of distance learning may be. So we made a choice in Belgium to make this a national priority. We also had obligatory teaching in presentia, with very strict health measures that were covered in health protocols that were drawn up together with health experts from our country, and reinforced support in certain school districts where it was the most necessary. In October, we had further destabilization of the working of many of our schools, and this led us to further strengthen our rules with the idea also of having the one-week holiday around All Saints' Day, giving a bit of breathing room to our school system and to break the contamination chain, as well as moving over to a 50% distant learning level for students aged 15 years and more. The modalities of implementation of what we called hybridization of teaching allowed students to have a minimum amount of teaching time in presentia, and also to have a greater amount of presence of vulnerable students. Since September, we've gone on working in this way with 100% presence in schools, and then hybrid systems in place for secondary school. Unfortunately, in Belgium, we're now seeing a large increase in the number of contaminations and intensive care hospitalizations, and that is causing Belgium to take new lockdown measures and to anticipate once again that there will be an extra week of Easter school holidays, 3 weeks instead of 2. The situation is much more difficult in some students than others, even with mixed modes. We see that students get discouraged, fall behind in school. Mental health of young people is also very disturbing and is calling for a global answer. We need to give priority to this in months to come, and you'll see this in the letter I've written to teachers. People will be staying at home on today, March 29th, and will be going back to 100% in presentia on April 19th for all classes, hoping that the health situation will calm down somewhat and allow us to have a calmer end of year. And this would also be a plea for priority vaccination of teachers, which is not yet a reality in our country.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I
Thank
of Education from Suriname. Maria Levens, are you able to show your video and switch on your microphone? No, in that case, we'll move to the next speaker, and that is going to be the Minister of Education, Science and Sports of the Republic of Lithuania, Her Excellency Ms. Jurgita Suicidiniene. Excuse me for the pronunciation, Your Excellency. Over to you.
One minute. Do you hear me?
Yes, it's clear. Please, over to you.
Dear colleagues, thank you for organizing this meeting and providing a platform to share our experiences. It's a very difficult period for every one of us, but especially to the education community. For our government, the return of students to schools is a priority. During the second wave of coronavirus in Lithuania, all schools were closed at the end of the last year, except for preschool educational institutions. A week ago, as the situation started improving, primary schools were opened in those municipalities having less than 200 cases per 100,000 inhabitants per 14 days. In other municipalities, we have launched a pilot model for safe return to school using the pooled virus sampling method. Our strategy in the field of education consists of several elements. First, the government decided at an early stage to vaccinate teachers and staff of preschool and primary education as a matter of priority. Currently, 70% of teachers in this group have been vaccinated. A few days ago, we decided to include into the list of priority vaccination also other staff of educational institutions. Second, we have developed and implemented a special program to compensate for educational losses caused by the pandemic. The program includes additional counseling for students who are struggling to succeed and graduates who are preparing for mature exams. We also plan summer schools and national consultations offered by subject teachers. We invited volunteers to help students who are struggling with their school assignments. Third, we have opened a research program for our schools, scholars to carry out research and deliver innovations in order to fight pandemic. Fourth, we agreed to postpone the start of state mature exams by 2 weeks to allow students to better prepare for them. Recently, we started face-to-face consultations for graduates in small groups up to 5 students at a time. Teachers definitely deserve the greatest thanks and help. They deserve to be vaccinated in corporate. That's our priority. I wish all the best and productive conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and also for sticking to time. Next is the Minister of Education, Youth, Sports and Culture from St. Kitts and Nevis, His Excellency Jono Powell. Your Excellency, over to you. And please try to stick to the 2 minutes. In that case, we will move to the next speaker, His Excellency Honorable Hamson Obua, the Minister of Education for Sports from Uganda. Your Excellency, over to you. Yes, we have been running late, so maybe some people had to leave. And then finally, we have the Minister from, the Vice Minister of Education from Yemen, Dr. Ali Alabab. Your Excellency, if you're online, over to you. Okay, I think His Excellency had to leave as well. In that case, I would just like to highlight that we have a statement from Iran, which has been put in the chat, and we have 3 more interventions, and I would like to move to an intervention from Indonesia by His Excellency, the Minister of Education and Culture, Mr. Nadiem Anwar Makari.
Madam Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, Excellency Ministers, Excellency Global Education Coalition representatives, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is my honor to address this highly regarded gathering of high-level ministerial event to mark the 2nd year of the COVID-19 pandemic. When I took office as the Minister of Education and Culture for 2019, we did not expect how cataclysmic the events unfolded during the COVID-19 pandemic. But we had to act very fast to prioritize both the safety and health of our teachers, students, and their parents and grandparents, many of them who lived with them in their homes, and to shut down schools temporarily. Now, the process from then onwards, we've realized the huge learning loss that could be potentially permanent and we've taken very calculated measures with which how to return students back to schools. The first thing we did was to create a protocol for face-to-face schooling that involved limiting the capacity of schools to 50%, ensuring social distancing by separating desks by a minimum of 1.5 meters, and forbidding all types of extracurricular activities that might encourage a lot of physical interaction with students, such as closing down the canteens, as well as activities such as group sports and various gatherings that are happening in schools. What we did was a very tiered approach, in which first we allowed the green zone and yellow zones. We created a color-coded zoning for COVID risk in different districts, and we allowed the green and yellow zones instead of the orange and red zones to start opening up. But that process happened very slowly, and some local governments were still reluctant to open. In January of this year, we allowed all schools to reopen in this limited way, but still the pickup now the traction is not as high as we had expected. Only about 15 to 20% of schools have reopened and followed this protocol. So what we are about to do is to create another policy that coincides with a vaccination drive. The first thing we did was to ensure that teachers around the country were prioritized in the vaccination drive as much as the elderly was. So now the civil servants level of priority, teachers are the first and most important, and therefore our plan is to vaccinate all our teachers by around June or July. And so the policy that we're creating is to make it mandatory for schools whose teachers have been vaccinated to provide an option to open face-to-face schooling, provide an option, but with a compromise of not forcing parents to have to send their kids to face-to-face schooling if they are not comfortable to do so. But that option must be provided by the schools that already have been vaccinated. So that's kind of the compromise that we have come to in terms of trying to drive as many children to actually go back to school in the safest possible way without infringing on the rights of parents to decide which risk level is appropriate. We've also done fundamental transformations on the budgeting structure of school funding, in which we have opened maximum flexibility for schools to prepare for face-to-face schooling, such as equipment like masks, thermometer, and a variety of hygiene infrastructure that will kind of mitigate the biggest risks of transmission during a face-to-face schooling experience. So the financial policy transformations, I think, are just as important as making it mandatory for schools to provide a face-to-face schooling option. So in order to give discretion for the principal to be able to invest in the tools and protocols and health protocols that are necessary to minimize transmission risk. And of course, local governments are fully empowered to shut down schools or even districts of schools when there is a significant rise in cases. And so that's also a very important part of the policy. So I think in trying to bridge the two goals of not exacerbating the loss of learning and creating a generational gap between the haves and the have-nots, but also at the same time trying to maintain general public safety, it's important to incorporate budget strategy into this. It's important to ensure that parents have choice, and it's important to ensure that local governments understand that they have to provide options once the vaccination drive has been completed. And it's extremely important to prioritize teachers as one of the most critical sectors, because it is in many countries the last sector to reopen right now, and it happens to be one of the most critical sectors in an economy. So I think those are the 4 principles that we've taken in Indonesia. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Next, we'll have a statement by His Excellency, the Minister of Education, from Finland, Mr. Juuso Saramo. Can we have the video from Finland, please?
Just a minute, just a minute.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, I wish to thank UNESCO for convening this topical meeting. The pandemic continues to challenge us all, with 2/3 of the world's student population still affected by full or partial school closures. Dear friends, in the case of Finland, I dare to say that overall, education providers have coped well with the ongoing crisis. Highly educated teachers with a lot of professional autonomy, the diversity of learning environments, also digital, that were already in practice before the pandemic, as well as an education system built on equity, inclusion and support, have all contributed to this. For us, one of the key lessons in that quality in education is also about resilience. We have been firmly committed to keeping the schools open whenever possible. This is why we have had temporary legislative amendments in use in order to allow decisions on school closures to be made at local and regional levels when contact teaching cannot be organized safely. The educational rights of every child have been upheld, even in situations where the premises of schools have been closed. Safety as our top priority, we have ensured the continuation of teaching and learning throughout the crisis. Pupils have had the right to school meals and welfare services also during distance learning. In Finland, we believe that the best solution for ensuring the safety of learning environments can be found locally, such as adapting the daily schedule of schools, using outdoor spaces for teaching, and other physical distancing measures. Systems with flexibility are prone to be more resilient. To conclude, we have also made substantial investments in support for learning and well-being at all levels of education. Last June, the government introduced an additional children's well-being package worth 320 million euros for mitigating the effects of distance learning. With these measures, we are also combating any potential gaps in learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And we have one final intervention, and that is by the Honourable Minister, Deputy Minister for Education and Training from Nauru, the Honourable Richard Hyde Menke.
Ekomi Romo from the Republic of Nauru. It is my pleasure to address this august gathering on the theme of keeping schools open, prioritizing and supporting teachers. In spite of the COVID-19 crisis that have impacted the world, schools in Nauru have remained open, mainly due to the diligence on border control and management. Be that as it may, the long-reaching ramifications still pervade Nauru society, and in this case, our schools. The challenging educational landscape has forced us to consider options for implementation in case of school closure. This draws our attention to equity, focused teaching and learning, and the implications for educators and their preparations. The questions that lingers in our minds at the implementation level are the how-tos in navigating teaching and learning, reprioritize professional preparation of teachers, rethink curriculum and assessment, learn new pedagogies, and provide opportunities for teachers in innovation and research whilst retaining a tight grip on the where-tos. The Nauru Ministry of Education values its teachers and the teaching profession as conduits of learning. Support for teachers' well-being and health is vital and is supported in retreats and reflective sessions. Teaching conditions and remunerations are constantly monitored and evaluated for adjustment and, if necessary, for extra provisions. The reality of closed borders raised challenges in recruitment of expatriate teachers that have created high teacher-student ratios, 1:50. Classroom management and enhancing positive emotional climates are being managed through teacher professional development opportunities, as well as improving teachers' learner support with the recruitment of teacher aides. Furthermore, former teachers have been reemployed on a part-time basis for recovery and remediation of students who have encountering learning problems. Positive outcomes are evident as at-risk students have progressed in their learning achievements. The aim to provide qualified teachers continues through the ongoing teaching training program offered by an external provider. It may be more feasible to focus on regional, local providers such as USB Nauru, campus, and if the situation demands a higher influx of qualified teachers, then the possibility of local teacher training facility may be considered. At the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, teachers were provided training on how to ensure learning continues from face-to-face classroom learning to an ongoing digital shift in preparation for school closure. Several obstacles varying from infrastructure, access, issues on limits on online teaching and engagement, optimal class sizes, alternative teaching applications, places new demands on teachers and teaching. The Nauru Ministry of Education continues to maneuver its path to ensure that teachers are provided quality support on the local platform. And with the assistance of global partners, working together for development is the key to success. I thank UNESCO for the opportunity. We continue to place our trust in our Almighty for His continued protection, and we pray for safety and peace to all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And we've come to the end of the interventions, and we've had many lessons learned, I think, which have been expressed by all the different speakers. And for that, I would like to now hand over to Dr. Susanna Grant-Lewis, who's the director of the International Institute for Educational Planning with UNESCO, to sort of summarize what the key takeaway messages were from this rich session. Susanna, over to you.
Thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be with you today. We have just experienced an extremely rich exchange of practices tried, lessons learned from over 24 UNESCO member states. Now, our task in this roundtable was to ask a few questions. What measures must be taken to keep schools alive? And many of you spoke about reopening as a priority, and how to ensure safe learning environment. We also needed to answer, how do we ensure the safety of teachers, and how do we support teachers to adapt to a new learning reality? So we've heard from ministers who shared their experience. This has been like a community of practice gathering for so many ministers to really hear each other's experiences. And we heard many common challenges and numerous common responses. As our keynote speaker, Professor Didier Jordan, explained, there's clear evidence to argue that schools should be the last institutions closed and the first to be reopened. And he shared with us the data, the evidence that supports that argument. And as each of you spoke, many of you echoed those words, that commitment to ensure that schools are reopening and that we continue the progress to ensure that we do not face a generational catastrophe. We have to recognize the many costs of schooling, and some of you spoke to a number of these. There was concern about the impact of the pandemic on access, on retention, and very much so on learning, and what you all are trying to do to address those issues. And I was very impressed that quite a few of you spoke to addressing the physical, the mental, the socio-emotional well-being of teachers as well as learners, and attending to recognizing the role that parents play as support for both teachers and for learners. And I didn't hear very many of you talk about how to put in place for the most marginalized the loss of nutritional support or healthcare support or social care when schools are closed. And this remains a challenge for many, I think. We were reminded by Professor Jordan that it's not a single intervention that will bring us out of the pandemic. It's not a single intervention that will allow us to safely reopen schools, continue learning, and support teachers. Just as we often speak of learners in holistic terms, we're not just talking about cognitive learning, socio-emotional learning, etc. So too, when we think about supporting teachers, we need to apply the very same principle. And I was very happy to hear about a number of interventions that are being tried to prevent the transmission in schools, protecting school populations, protecting the socio-emotional needs of many, and paying attention to learning continuity. I loved that there was regularly recognition of the critical role that teachers play, and one intervention talked about teachers as heroes. I think that as we go away and reapply ourselves to this critically important issue of keeping schools open, keeping learning happening, and keeping our teachers protected and supported, we should be sure that we are doing three things. Build and maintain trust. Trust the professionalism of teachers and their representatives, and support them. Often be sure to listen to them to hear what it is that they need, and adapt the human resource policies and regulatory frameworks in support of that. Continue, please, all of you, to reduce the risks to everyone in the school community, including teachers. Keep community transmission low, and we can reopen schools, and because we know schools are not going to exacerbate that situation where transmission in the community is low or moderate. And try to provide more comprehensive support for teachers. Several of you spoke of the financial difficulty that the pandemic has had on education systems, and we know that's the case. But we also heard from the AGG in our plenary, 76 out of 115 countries have prioritized teachers with vaccination plans. And I want to really applaud that. That's very important, and several of you mentioned that. But it still leaves more than 1/3 of the countries in the world not prioritizing teachers. So these are some final thoughts. I thank you so much for sharing your rich experiences. I think we've learned a lot. And we hope that this community of practice will continue into the future. Back to you, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Susanna Grant-Lewis, for those concluding remarks. And this ends the roundtable on keeping schools open, prioritizing and supporting teachers. And I think we'll now move to the closing session of this high-level ministerial meeting on 1 year into COVID, prioritizing education recovery to avoid a generational catastrophe. Thank you all very much for participating.
Welcome back to all ministers and participants to this plenary closing session. Well, it's been a very inspiring discussion. You evoked the extensive range of measures in place to reopen schools safely, which is one of the big priorities you have, all of us have, and addressing learning losses and accelerate the transformation that education actually needs. Well, we must be very clear, no government can address this big challenge alone. And multilateralism cooperation is more than ever indispensable. Well, today I'm very pleased to be here with my two dear friends and colleagues, Jaime Saavedra from the World Bank and Rob Jenkins from UNICEF.
We've been working, may I say like this, as one, over the past year, just the joint forces of our three organizations really to sustain, to support the governments in this big mission we have together. Through a consortium we started last year, supported financially by the Global Partnership for Education, and continuing now today, and that's the reason why we are the three of us here, to present an interesting initiative. It's about a mission for recovery education this year, 2021, which is another critical year. And the priorities are threefold. I recall them briefly before giving the floor to my colleagues. First, no child is left behind. Ensuring means that all children and youth getting back to school this year and receiving comprehensive support they need. Second point, every child is learning, and this is about accelerating learning and breaking down the digital divide and learning divide. And third, all teachers are empowered and supported, and this is very much focusing on teachers this year. Well, we'll work at country level, we'll accelerate actions which are already running, and let me give the floor first to Rob Jenksy, Chief of Education and Associate Director at UNICEF, to talk about this incredibly important initiative. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefania. And just let me begin by saying how much I appreciate our partnership with you and UNESCO, and also with the World Bank. And I really feel these three organizations, as you said, that we've joined forces during this very challenging time. And I'm also very excited to be part of this recovery mission for the next few months, prioritizing exactly what you've mentioned, these three key priorities. Let me just highlight the first priority, as you've mentioned, which is to ensure all children and youth are back in school and receive the comprehensive support that they need to be successful. So this priority entails two key areas of work. One is we need to proactively identify those marginalized children within each community, understand who and where they are and the barriers they're facing to return back to school. Then we need to proactively working with them to overcome those barriers. They may be children living in poor households, maybe adolescent girls, it could be children with disabilities, children learning in a language that is not offered in the school system. So understanding which children in each context face barriers and proactively overcoming them, with the goal of all children returning back to school. The second part of this first component is when children return back to school, they need to receive the full support, comprehensive support, so that they're successful. We recognize what a trying time this has been for children, not only in the learning loss that many have experienced, but also they've been challenged by no longer having access to midday meals, so nutritional support offered by schools, by mental and psychosocial support offered by schools, but also a sense of safety and protection. So as children come back into school, we need to work collectively to ensure they're provided the full comprehensive support that they need and require and have a right to in order to be successful and regain the learning that they have lost and re-enter to their learning pathway. So really excited by this recovery mission. Count on UNICEF's full support. Let me pass back to you, Stefania.
Thank you very much, Rob. And now I'm giving with pleasure the floor to Jaime Saavedra, who is Global Director of Education at the World Bank. Please, the floor is yours.
So, no, thank you very much, Stefania, for this opportunity. First of all, to work all together, both the international institutions that are here, but also working together with all country counterparts.
Yeah.
Actually, we do as a society owe to our children. And as Rob was saying, the first thing that we owe them is to make sure that they do have the opportunity to be back to school one way or the other, right? We'll need to be creative, but we need to do it with a sense of urgency. This really has to happen as soon as we can. Of course, we need to balance the health risks, and that's absolutely critical, but we need to make sure that kids are back to learning. We need to remember that we were already in a learning crisis. We were a year ago already talking that the world as a whole is really confronting an extremely complex situation with 53% of children who are not able to read and understand a text by age 10, what we call learning poverty. That was already a dramatic situation. And that 53% is going up. Right, we're calculated that this could go up like 11 points, right? So that's really, really dramatic. So we have now a crisis within a crisis, right? This pandemic is the largest shock that we have been living. Hence, and this is the second point that we all want to make. The first one was, as Rob was saying, let's go back to school one way or the other. Let's go back to learning. But when we talk about learning, there are a few specific elements that we really need to address. First, we really need to apply learning assessment tools such that we know where each kid is. Right? It's not about just let's return to school. We need to have a good understanding. Each teacher has to have a good understanding of what are the needs of each one of his or her students. And systems have to know where they are, right, in terms of the magnitude of the learning losses. Second, we need to make sure that schools incorporate social-emotional learning, right, as part of their urgent menu, as part of their crisis menu. Right, this is a year where we really need to put down the fire, but part of that is the mental health and the social-emotional well-being of our children. So we need to measure learning. Second, we need to emphasize social-emotional learning among our children. And finally, this is not about returning to where we are, right? We really need to make up for the time. So we really need to invest in accelerating learning and in remedial learning tools, right? This is not about just going back to where we were in 2019 or in 2020, but we need to make sure that we make up for the time with extra tutoring, right? With additional hours, with additional support, with teach at the right level tools that will allow all of us, right, to make sure that all children, right, have the opportunity to make up for that lost time. So this going back to school, right, is about measuring, is about social-emotional learning, and it's about making up for this lost time. There's a huge homework, and it's absolutely critical that we move fast on that front. Over to you, Stefania.
Thank you very much, Jaime. The third pillar is about teachers. We know that teachers has been the front line workers, some kind of heroes in this crisis. We need that they need our support from governments, from international organizations, starting from this vaccination campaign. We've been the first together to advocate for teachers being vaccinated and prioritized, and the sound interesting data this day we heard from our survey coming out. But it's not simply about that. It's about giving the right competencies, updating, reskilling their competencies, about the digital skills. It's about social-emotional supporting them as well as children, as my colleagues said, talking about these three pillars of our mission, Recovery Education 2021. Well, this brings me to the end of a long day, but I think it's been very, very much interesting to listen to ministers, their experiences, their challenges, their lessons learned, and some interesting, innovative solutions. Jaime said before, it's not going back to the business as usual. We know, we hope, and we are strongly committed to take this opportunity, the positive side of the crisis, to unlock innovation, the potential of innovation that we are just looking around and see all over the world. And Having said that, I wish to thank all of you, starting with my two colleagues and friends here connected with us from across the sea, and all participants and ministers at this 1 year in the COVID-19 lessons learned, and mostly looking with a message of hope to the near future. Thank you very much for joining us.
Recording stopped.